Today's recipe is chicken pot pie from scratch, including the crust. So for the crust, the ingredients are 1 cup of butter, 1/2 teaspoon salt, 1/2 cup cold water, and 2 1/4 cup flour. If you're making your own crust, follow my recipe, but if you want to use a store-bought one, if you go to about 4 minutes and 50 seconds, you'll hit where we add the other ingredients to the pie. So here first I'm just combining the flour and the salt into a large bowl. And I am actually making a quadruple recipe. This 4-time recipe would make me 4 crusts. So for the pot pie, you need 2, or a double recipe. So I'm making a quadruple to make 2 pot pies. The next step is to cube your butter. So I just cut the stick into thirds, turn it, cut it into thirds again, and then slice it up about a tablespoon into pats. And it makes these little cubes. And then I just use my hands to try to separate them a little bit and throw them into the bowl. So we'll get all of those cut up and in the bowl. Next, you'll need to get a pastry cutter, or if you don't have a pastry cutter, you could use a fork. Definitely takes a lot longer with a fork than it does a pastry cutter. Costs you maybe $8 to $10 to buy one of these at the store. So really useful for making pie crusts and other baked items that you like to have flaky. So you're just rocking it back and forth to take those chunks of butter and incorporate them into the flour and make them smaller. Now the goal is to get these to a crumble consistency, and this usually takes a few minutes. You do not want to get rid of all the parts of butter. Having those lumps of butter in there is what's going to help keep the flakiness of the crust. Now I'm just using my hands to feel for any very large pieces and breaking those up with my fingers by just kind of roughing them together. You want to try to keep your hands out of the mixture as much as possible though, because your hand heat will actually melt the butter and we don't want that. So just quickly hands through it to feel for large chunks. Then you'll be adding your cold water about 1/4 cup at a time. You want to do this slowly because you don't want to add too much water. Continue working it with your hands and squeezing it together to see how well it forms into a dough ball or clump. So here I'm just kind of squeezing and pressing, and now it's starting to feel like it's coming together a little bit. And if I kind of squeeze it together, it forms into one larger ball. So that's when you know you should stop adding water. So if you don't use all the water from the recipe, that's okay. Sometimes depends on the humidity of the area you're in and the way that you measured your flour. We're looking to still see chunks of butter in our dough. So that's what I'm showing you here. Then you're going to take your dough ball and you'll need to divide it into the number of crusts that you made the recipe for. And so I made my recipe for 4 crusts. I'm going to get my knife and I'm going to cut it into 4 pieces. Then you're going to take each piece and form it into a flattened disc. And you want it to be thin and flat so that it chills quickly. So here I'm just going to do that quick with all 4 of my crusts. And then the next step is going to be to wrap them in plastic wrap. I like to use the press and seal. I think that works really well. And we're going to be putting these in the refrigerator for at least 2 hours so that they get cold. And that's really going to help when it comes time to roll them out to make them easy to work with and form into our pie crust and our pie plate. So here you'll see, not super thick. They're nice and thin so that they can get chilled quickly. Now that the pie crusts have chilled, we're going to look at how to make the pie. The ingredients to put the pie together are 1/3 cup butter, 1/3 cup onion diced, 1/3 cup flour, salt and pepper to taste, a 1/2 teaspoon of celery seed if you like, about 3/4 pound of chicken cubed. I recommend dark meat, 1 3/4 cup chicken broth, 2/3 cup of milk, 1/3 cup celery, 1/2 cup of frozen peas, and 1/2 cup of sliced carrots. Put a pot of water on to boil and put another pan, a large pan, on over medium-high heat. We're going to add the butter to that pan. The water is going to be coming to a boil while we do this so that we don't have to wait later for that to happen. So here the butter is melted. I'm just giving it a quick stir. And now we're going to add our onion. We're going to cook the onion, stirring it occasionally until it starts to soften and turn translucent. This is starting to look good. So the next step is going to be adding the flour in. When you add the flour in, it's going to turn into almost like a paste or a roux, if you've heard that term before. And you just want to cook this for about 1 minute to cook the rawness out of the flour. Now we're adding our spices. I did choose to use celery seeds, one of my favorite ingredients of this pie. Salt and pepper to taste. Again, I just sort of measure with my heart, not with a spoon. So do what you like. And then I'm stirring in slowly this chicken broth. It'll start out pretty lumpy, and then as you continue to stir, those lumps will start to go away. And remember, you've got onion in here, so you're still going to see some lumps, but you want to try to make sure most of them are not flour. Then you're going to slowly add the milk and do the same, continuing to stir and cook. And it'll take a few minutes for that to get thickened. So while we're waiting for that to thicken up, we're going to add the carrots, peas, and celery to the boiling water, and we're going to boil them just until really they've softened. You don't want them to be mushy. And remember, we're only using about a half a bag here of frozen peas, and we'll save the rest for later. After about 5 minutes or so, you'll see that your sauce is starting to thicken. And so here I'm just showing you about how thick it is. And once you turn it off the heat, it's actually going to even thicken more. So stop sooner rather than later. Turn the heat off, and if you have an electric stove like I do, remove it from the stove because that will continue to cook it on the heat. So this is definitely done. We're just going to pull it off and let it cool slightly while we finish preparing the rest of the pie. Next, we're going to go ahead and cube up the chicken into bite-sized pieces. I like to use leg and thigh meat or the dark meats for chicken pot pie. I just think it tastes a lot more decadent that way. Your vegetables should be done at this point, so you are going to drain those once they're softened, if I didn't mention that before. So everything is really ready, and now we just need to assemble the pie itself. So here's our pie crusts, which have been chilling in the refrigerator. You can see still chunks of butter in there, so that's what we're hoping for. And we need to get these rolled out. One of my favorite little tools I found on Amazon is this little duster tool, and I use it for flour when I am putting together pie crusts or bread dough. It really gives me a nice fine dusting. Sometimes if I use my hands, it's just too much and then I overdo it. So I like to dust the bottom and then dust a little over the top so that I can roll these out. I'm using my rolling pin with the guides on it. You'll see those red guides, and I'm rolling it out at 1/4 inch here. And I'm starting to notice as I'm rolling it that this is just too thick. So what's cool about this rolling pin is that these guides can be changed in and out by just unscrewing the end and removing the guide. So I'm going to take this red disc off and then putting on the guide of the size that you want. So the orange one is a smaller. I think the orange one is 1/8 of an inch. So you're going to take those apart, put the orange ones on, screw it back in, and then when you roll the dough, it will roll to that even thickness. Sometimes I get a heavy hand and press a little hard, so these have been helpful for me to prevent over or under rolling certain areas. And you're just going to roll it and try to get it as much in a circle as possible, and if you need to use your hands to pat the edges out a little more circular, you sure can. Go ahead and check the size and make sure it's good for your pan, and then do the same for your second crust to go on the top. Grease the bottom of your pie plate and press one of the crusts into the bottom of the pie plate. You'll want to peel off any of the excess that hangs over the edge because that's going to burn, and then just try to form it to the shape of the pan. If you have any areas that are cracked or ripped, you can take any pieces you have ripped off and use those to patch it up a little bit, as I did here. And then put your chicken in the bottom of the pie. Next, you're going to spoon the cooked vegetables over the top and just spread them out so the pie has evenly distributed chicken and vegetables. And then dump your sauce over the top to fill the pie. Then place your top crust over the top. And what you want to do is take the top edge of the crust and fold it under the edge of the bottom crust. So you're kind of folding it over together. Now, if you want to make this easy, you can fold it over and just use a fork to go around the outside and crimp the edges together. That's going to help keep the contents of the pie inside. I like to crimp it, and I just use my pointer finger and my thumb, and then I put my other finger in between and sort of pull to form that fluted kind of pattern. Definitely took me a while to get that down a little bit, and this pie doesn't win any beauty contests or anything, but I think it makes it look a little nicer than the fork. So this is how I do mine. And you'll want to slit a couple slits in the top so that it can steam a little bit, and I might recommend that you actually bake this on a cookie sheeter pie pan plate and cook for about 30 to 35 minutes at 425 degrees. And that's it. You'll have a wonderful homemade chicken pot pie. I hope you enjoy this recipe, and if you have any comments, leave them below. Thanks for cooking with me, and we'll see you next time.